I think the most rewarding thing about doing this today is that it actually validates that my diploma is real. I did graduate from UCLA in 1996, and since the chancellor who signed my diploma was here and I'm allowed to speak to the alumni, I guess I'm good to go. So we're going to talk about the Olympics. I would say that UCLA and the Olympics have a really interesting history as we here celebrating the 100th anniversary of this incredible university. I think the story of Los Angeles and the story of the Olympics, frankly, are very much intertwined. And hopefully you'll start to see a little bit about that and get people excited for 2028. I'm going to talk for 15, 20 minutes and then open it up to questions, and I promise we can talk about traffic because I know that'll be someone's first question. So, in July of 2028, the Summer Olympics are coming back to the United States of America for the first time since 1996. We will be only the third city in history to host the Olympics 3 times, the other 2 being London, and then, which obviously last hosted in 2012, and Paris, which will host the preceding Olympics to ours in 2024. The other important fact of the Summer Olympics being in 2028, just for those of you who have kids or grandkids who may be here then, is there probably won't be summer school that summer. Just saying. I don't know if I'm actually allowed to officially tell anybody that, but there probably won't be summer school. And to be fair, there would not be, frankly, an Olympics in 2028 without UCLA. So the Olympics, at least in its modern version, were created by a man named Pierre de Coubertin in 1896. And he had this Olympic creed, which I read this morning, and I hadn't read it in a while, and I thought it was actually really powerful given the world we're living in and the times we're in. And the Olympic creed is as follows. The most important thing in the Olympic Games is not to win, but to take part, just as the most important thing in life is not the triumph, but the struggle. The essential thing is not to have conquered, but to have fought well. And that Olympic creed is read at the opening ceremonies of every Olympic Games since 1896. The Olympic rings are intertwined, representing the 5 inhabited continents of the world. And it's what I always say about the Olympics. The Olympics are at its best when they're about people and social justice. And that is what we're going to do in 2028. There is nothing that unites the Olympic Games, unites people like the Olympic Games. There are more countries that will march in the opening ceremonies in 2028 than there are members of the United Nations. There will be, in 2028, roughly 15,000 athletes competing from 208 countries. It was the Olympic Games in 2018 that united Korea and the Korean Peninsula for the first time in 70 years. And it's those Olympic Games that, frankly, going back to ancient Greece, that got people to put their arms down and compete under the same set of rules. And I think what this world has become, the Olympic Games are one of the few things that actually has the opportunity to bring people together. I would say, shockingly, we had one resolution passed in Congress. It actually passed 435-0, and I'm fairly certain that in the state of our Congress, the only thing that's ever passed 435-0. And we had 11 city council votes here in Los Angeles, and they were all passed unanimously. So it is truly a uniting factor. As the mayor liked to joke, the Olympics polls at like 88%, and not even blue skies poll at 88% in Los Angeles. So 1932. So the Olympics were actually supposed to come to LA in 1928, which is why the Coliseum was built in 1923. But what they realized is literally nobody knew where Los Angeles was in 1928, and they actually didn't even know how to get to Los Angeles. So they figured, we'll let them go to Amsterdam in 1928, and then in 1932 we'll go to this place called Los Angeles, and we have no idea what that means, but whatever. Now, if you think about it, UCLA had just moved to Westwood and had no facilities to house athletes. But the Indian men's field hockey team trained here at campus and actually won a gold medal that year, which is shocking. 1932, there was a huge beautification effort for the city. 1932 was in the middle of the Depression. Thousands and thousands of palm trees that you see today in the city of Los Angeles were planted for the 1932 Olympics. Olympic Boulevard, one of my favorite stats. Do you know why it's called Olympic Boulevard? It's 10th Street, and they were the 10th Olympiad. And we renamed 10th Street Olympic Boulevard. Is there a 34? Is there like a big 34th Street in LA? Because we're the 34th summer in 2028, so I don't know what I get to rename then. And in a little bit of foreshadowing, in the middle of the Depression, the 1932 Olympic Games produced $1 million profit. 1984. And by the way, as you think about the world, 1932 really did establish Los Angeles as a credible American city. 1984. So how did the Olympics come to LA in 1984? Well, you had this problem in 1976 where you had the Summer Games in Montreal, and they literally bankrupted the city. And post that, in 1977, there were two cities bidding for the Olympics. I would say competing, because bidding might have been a little bit of an exaggeration. And those two cities were Tehran and Los Angeles. You can't make this stuff up. And Tehran pulled out, and LA was left with the opportunity to accept, if you will, the Olympics. And actually the city council was split 7-7. And there was a city council member who Tom Bradley spent all night lobbying to try and get him to vote in favor, which he did. And they actually got the vote 8-7. They had all sorts of demands they made to the IOC, who didn't have a whole lot of other options. But literally at Getty House, where, by the way, the mayor and I sat and essentially made the deal for the 2028 Games in the same room where that guy got tortured by Tom Bradley. The Olympics decided to come to LA in 1984. And it was a completely different paradigm. First, as it relates to UCLA, amazingly, UCLA only had 2,000 rooms in 1984, so the Athletes Village was split between USC and UCLA. Just for some perspective, there were about 6,500 athletes in the games in 1984. Obviously, we'll have 15,000 athletes. The athletes trained in both UCLA gyms, the brand new John Wooden Center, Sunset Rec, which I'm sure the pool was still the scene back then, and Drake. By the way, Ducky Drake, a former Olympic coach of track and field team. One of my favorite things, I actually run at Drake a lot, is when you go up there, the wall of Olympians from UCLA is a really awesome thing if you haven't looked at it. The UCLA marching band played in the opening ceremonies in 1984. The press corps took over Ackerman, and ABC Television, who broadcast the games, took over Spalding Field. But 1984 really transformed the modern Olympic Games. Peter Ueberroth, it was the first privately produced, financed Olympic Games in history. The sponsorship model he created, the television revenue they created, both extraordinary, groundbreaking, and really set the stage for what is sort of the modern commercialization of the Olympic Games. Those Olympic Games generated a $232 million surplus, of which 40% was given to what is now called the LA 84 Foundation. That foundation has served 3 million Angelenos, still today gives around $15 million a year to charity, still exists today, funding programs all over the city. And those programs, just for some perspective, built the tennis courts where Serena and Venus Williams learned to play tennis. They funded the basketball program where Russell Westbrook learned how to play basketball. So the legacy of 84 is long and deep. Some other really interesting things about 1984. 1984, everyone remembers Joan Benoit winning the first marathon. Does anybody know why that was the first women's marathon, or she was the first women's marathon winner? Because before 1984, the Track and Field Federation and the Olympic movement as a whole did not believe women could run 26.2 miles. Seriously. 1984 Olympics were the first Olympic Games where there were distance events for women in both track and field and swimming. Think about that. And so in 1984 also, there were no Paralympics in 1984, or certainly not in the way they exist today. But to their credit, the organizing committee, they actually ran Paralympic competitions on the track during the 1984 there was a wheelchair race on the track during the '84 track and field event. So it was actually a really, in a couple ways, a really groundbreaking Olympics, far beyond what it gets known for in terms of the profit and the privately financed piece. So, UCLA in the games. If UCLA were a country, it would rank 20th in all-time medal counts. By the way, there has been a Bruin in every summer game since 1928. We've won 261 medals. Just to make it a little bigger, if you add the 4 California big schools, USC, UCLA, Cal, and Stanford together, over 1,000 medals. I mean, it is by far the most dominant set of schools. Really, the Olympics in California are almost synonymous. Jackie Robinson, for all his incredible accomplishments, actually made the 1940 Olympic team as a long jumper. Those Olympics were canceled because of World War II, but he actually made the Olympic team, which was pretty cool for a guy I'm sure all of us as Bruins look up to. Rayford Johnson, he actually chose UCLA because of its long history of having minority athletes in prominent positions, obviously Jackie and Arthur Ashe. He was a 2-time Olympic decathlete. He was the silver medalist in 1956 and the gold medalist in 1960. And obviously, he carried the torch in 1984, probably the single greatest honor someone could bestow on someone. We can start a list, by the way, who gets to carry the torch in 2028. Fairly certain it won't be a Trojan, I'm just saying. Jackie Joyner-Kersee, I mean, the long list of Olympic heroes from UCLA is long, but Jackie Joyner in 1986, one of America's greatest Olympians, obviously, and the list goes on. And this is just a place that oozes Olympic history, and it's something I think we're all very proud of. So now 2028. Let me just start by saying, if the mayor of your city ever calls and asks you to do something for nothing, you should just hang up the phone. Because in the summer of 2014, Eric Garcetti called me, and the first thing was, hey, look, I really want to bid for the Olympics. I need someone to help do that. Do you have any ideas? And so I gave him a few names. And then he called back and he said, I think you should do it. And I was like, well, I actually have a job. I'm pretty happy. And by the way, this is a terrible idea. You're going to lose. They're never coming back to America. It's not happening. And then the third call, he invoked a kind of mayoral executive privilege and said, you're doing this. And so began our journey. And that journey began with the United States process, LA, Boston, San Francisco, and Washington, D.C. And of course, Mayor and I were like, well, of course they'll come to LA. Like, look, we have everything, we're ready to go. And in the infinite wisdom of the U.S. Olympic Committee, they chose Boston. And within an hour, there was a highly organized, highly capable, highly competent No Olympics in Boston coalition. And 6 months later, they were back saying, please bid for the Olympics. So always interesting to start a big global competition having been a loser once. And we began our Olympic journey in really September of 2015 against 4 European cities, Paris, Budapest, Hamburg, and Rome. Now, just for some perspective, you're all obviously very bright because you went to UCLA or you're connected to UCLA, so that qualifies you. If I said to you, I want you to pick somewhere to put the Summer Olympics, it's this big event, a lot of decisions, you'd probably say 2 things. One, I need to spend a lot of time in that city. Seems pretty obvious to get to know the city you're going to give the Olympics to. And 2, I really want to understand their detailed plans of how they're going to deliver the games. Well, the IOC is an odd group of people. In our case, it was 96 members. They're allowed to have 115, but they're not always at capacity. It's everyone from the Princess Royal in the Mir of Qatar to athletes and heads of Olympic committees and everyone in between. And they are prohibited by rule from visiting the city. Small problem. And while it's awesome and it's online and you can read it, our 500-page plan to produce the Olympics, I'm sure that none of them read. And so what you realize is you were entering a competition that was just like any other political race. We were there to meet our voters. As the mayor liked to always say, that is the longest campaign, The longest, most expensive campaign with the fewest number of voters of anything in the world. Just for some perspective, we spent $51 million in 2 years, all privately raised, for 100 voters, essentially, 96 voters. The other 4 bidders all got funded by their governments. Ours was privately funded. And the mayor and I took a really simple approach, which was we were going to be authentically us. We were going to be 2 relatively young guys from Los Angeles. We were going to tell people exactly who we are as people, exactly what this city stands for, exactly what we have in place. And if that's not good enough, then they're going to go somewhere else. Now, the challenge for us was, because those people weren't allowed to come to Los Angeles, 44 of those 96 members live in Europe, which means they actually do go to those other cities a lot for their normal day-to-day stuff. And we had the last time some of those members were in LA was 1984, by the way. And LA, as you know, has changed a lot since 1984. We had a really interesting journey. I would say a few amazing things happened. First of all, you had a couple cities drop out quickly. You had Hamburg lose a referendum and drop out quickly. And then you had a socialist mayor get elected in Rome, and she had no interest in funding an Olympic Games. And that left Budapest, Los Angeles, and Paris. And our first presentation with those 3 cities was in Doha, Qatar, in November of 2016. But like after November 9th, 2016. It was an interesting time to tell the world to come to your country. I mean, look, forget about what your politics are. We had an elected president of the United States who said, we don't want you in our country. And here we were, representing our country, inviting the world. It was interesting, to say the least, in a Muslim country. So that was a really interesting place to be. But it just proves that if you don't play the game, you can't win. And we stuck around. We competed. And shortly thereafter, amazingly, Hungary dropped out. Budapest, Hungary dropped out. And the IOC was left with 2 cities. And we came up with this idea that one of 2 things was going to happen for certain when you had Paris and Los Angeles competing for the 2024 Games. Either Paris would have lost on 4 consecutive bids. Now you have to understand, the French are deeply ingrained in the Olympic movement. And what I mean by that is international sporting federations, National Olympic Committee, obviously, heads of sports, there are French people everywhere. And by the way, the language of the Olympic movement is French, so let's not lose sight of that, and they're in Switzerland. Whereas America is not really part of the Olympic movement. There's one federation that has an American leader, and no vice presidents, and any of the other federations are American. So we are not part of the movement. So Paris would have lost 4 consecutive bids. Or the 3 largest cities in America would have lost in 3 consecutive bids, right? New York, Chicago, Los Angeles. And for an organization that gets 50% of its revenue, the IOC, from American companies, that's probably not a great message to send. So what we said is, instead of having a loser and a winner, why not stand up and have 2 winners? Why not give one city 2024 and one city 2028? And you will have created an era of stability in the Olympic movement that's truly unprecedented. And if you come to Tokyo of 2020, right, you will have gone from the murderer's row of bad cities, and I don't mean they're bad cities, but less than ideal cities to host games, 2014, Sochi, 2016, Rio, 2018, Pyeongchang, 3 challenging cities to host games for all sorts of reasons, not necessarily their own fault. 2, Tokyo 2020, Beijing 2022, Paris or LA 2024, to be determined for 2026, and Paris or LA for 2028. 2026 is between Milan and Stockholm, but if you end up in Milan, you will have the 5 of the 10 most important cities in the world hosting 5 consecutive Olympic Games for the first time in Olympic history, and that is a really powerful opportunity. And so the IOC kind of got excited about this idea. And then it became this game of poker about 24 and 28. And in the end, for us, not quite how we played it in the game, but the decision was really simple. Frankly, the stronger city is the one that could wait till 2028. Because if you have to build stuff and organize stuff, the longer you wait, the more expensive it gets, the more complicated it gets. For us, I've always said we're games ready. We are ready to host the games today. And so our view was, what could we get for waiting 4 years? And what we ended up getting was a lot. And what we got was, by the way, time. The one thing you can't actually buy is more time. And then we got about $500 million. So between those two things, waiting till 2028 was a pretty good thing. So we get to bring the Olympic Games for the first time in really a generation, maybe a little more, at a time when LA is having its moment. And it's, again, tying it back to UCLA, you got this moment in time where, when I was a student, I had this professor. He obviously did go to Cal, but he told me that, UCLA was the junior university, and that's why we're baby blue and not dark blue, and that's why we're Bruins and not Bears. But my office is in Westwood. I drive around, #1 public university in the world. Like, you see all this stuff. UCLA has become, and LA has now become, one of the 10 great cities of the world. And what a great time to have the biggest event in the world, which the Olympics is, by any measure. Just for some perspective, the Olympics is the single biggest event in the world, come to one of the great cities of the world 10 years in advance. And what can we use that? What kind of flags can we put in the ground to motivate people, to get people excited, to energize communities, to rally organizations? And we're going to get to do that, to take the optimism and youthful energy that is sort of comes from every corner of Los Angeles and to focus that for the next 10 years is an incredible opportunity. LA is the most diverse city on earth. 27 countries have the second largest population of their citizens outside their home country in the city of Los Angeles, which means every one of those countries is going to have a home field advantage when they come to Los Angeles to compete in 2028. It's going to be a truly incredible experience, but we have learned from the past. We are a private organization. We are not a city enterprise. The city of LA, obviously, technically speaking, has signed a host city contract, but we are a privately funded, privately operated non-government entity to deliver these games, which means we are going to focus on living up to our past success of 32 and 84 in an attempt to deliver a profit that can create a legacy for a long time. And we have the opportunity to do that for a whole host of reasons, but starting with sort of the core of what exists in LA. And what exists in LA is really unprecedented. I'll explain a little bit of our plan, but I will tell people that this real secret of this and the Olympics in LA is not Staples Center, the Rams, the Coliseum, the Rose Bowl, Dodger Stadium. It's actually none of those things. The secret of the Olympics in Los Angeles is really simply USC and UCLA. There's no city on earth that has two universities of that size, of this scale, with athletic programs that operate at that level, that are in the city center 10 miles from each other. It does not exist on the face of the earth. And those two universities, these two universities, are the singular reason why we can, in a really differentiated way, host the Olympic Games. But our plan was to make the Olympics fit our city, not make our city fit the Olympics. And what that meant was we're going to focus on using existing facilities. So obviously, I'll get to UCLA last. In 1984, one of the things people forget, although people in the Valley don't forget this, is the Olympics ignored the Valley. There was not a singular Olympic event in the Valley in 1984, and we're going to rectify that. The Valley Sports Park, which is where the Sepulveda Basin is, will be host to a bunch of events. And then we're going to create these sports parks around the city. Obviously, downtown will be the biggest cluster of events. I think it's called Dignity Health, which is StubHub Center in Carson, Long Beach. Those will be 4 big hubs of events. There about 80% of the events will be in those venues or those environments. And the idea is a couple things. One, if you have multiple sports parks, you can actually get the Olympics to touch every part of the city. From a fan perspective, if you have multiple sports parks, you can enter a park once, go through security once, and who knows what security will be like in 2028, but go through security once, and then you can go to any of the venues without having to go through security every time. If you have a bunch of different venues spread out, you have to go to a venue, go to security, then you leave and you go to another event. And so we think from an experience standpoint, it will be awesome. There are 31 competition venues in Los Angeles amongst all of them. And the Rose Bowl and the Coliseum will be the first venues to appear in 3 Olympic Games. So while 2 other cities have hosted the Olympic Games, none of their venues exist. We're actually also going to use, it's not really public, but I guess we're kind of public now, but we're probably going to use some other venues that were used in 1932 and a bunch of venues in 84, and then obviously a bunch of venues that are new. And so, You layer on top of this what's going on in the city of LA, and it's remarkable. In 1984, we were still building freeways. We have 8 or 10 rail lines under construction now. The rail that will come to Wilshire and Midvale will be done by the Olympic Games, and you will be able to get from there to the Olympics in 20 minutes. So it's a different LA. It's an exciting LA, and there couldn't be a better time to bring the Olympics to LA. Obviously, UCLA, literally without the dorms at UCLA, we could not do this. So just think about what our friends in Paris are doing today. The Olympic Games are going to be in Paris in 5 years and 2 months. 5 years and 2 months. Now go across the way and walk around the dorms and pretend that those don't exist. Now go find a piece of land in Paris and go build that in 5.5 years. And then the first time you're going to use them is when 17,500 athletes and 15 million people show up in your city. That's exactly what's happening in Paris today. For us, we just get to kick students out. But not only that, and obviously UCLA is doing an incredible job. There's the 4 buildings at the bottom I think are actually going to start, Rhea, right? They're going to get built soon, right? She promised me they'd be built soon, don't worry about it. We actually don't need to build anything new. We can host the Olympic Village today. But there's a few other things. So to prove our point to the IOC has this thing called an evaluation commission where they bring all these people and they come to your city that's bidding for the Olympics and they spend 3 days. It's literally ridiculously exhausting and intense. And they pressure test a lot of your things. It's a couple IOC members and it's a lot of subject matter experts. And we did something really fun. We took them to lunch at the dorms. And we did not get them special food. We just said, look, here it is. This is not BS. We're not pretending like this is, go eat. Go to check out our room. Like, it's here. And they were blown away. Because the truth is, you actually couldn't afford to build those dorms in LA, frankly, or in Paris, and operate them at the way they operate. So they're incredible. And then you think about something I actually never thought about. One of the IOC members who was with there, 3 IOC members, said, the trees are so mature. I was like, what? It seems like an odd thing to say, the trees are mature. What are you talking about? But then I thought about it. That Olympic Village in Paris, guess what the last thing they're going to do is plant a tree. And they're going to be like this big. And think about feeding 17,500 athletes 24 hours a day for 17 days and then them going away and having to do it for 10,000 Paralympians 10 days later. We feed more students today at UCLA than we will feed athletes during the Olympic Games. We clean rooms. We fix toilets. We do laundry. All of those things, operationally, we're ready to go. And that, to me, means we get to do the fun stuff. What does it mean to make the best athlete experience that's ever been delivered for an athlete when you don't actually have to build that and you just get to use that? So the way I like to describe it to people is, we don't own the copyright on good ideas. We just own the copyright on being able to do the good ideas because everyone else is so worried about building all these crazy things that when you don't have to build them, you can spend a lot of time thinking about what it means. We did all these athlete forums. Janet Evans, who's the first person I hired or brought on as my partner in crime to this Olympic madness, we held athlete forums all over the country just to get input during the bid phase and how do you make an Olympics better if we're fortunate enough to win and host the games. Like top 3 complaint by an athlete who competes in the Olympics, these are all former Olympians, is that they lose their room key. I know that sounds crazy, but think about it. Your moment of greatest potential accomplishment, and the last thing on earth you're thinking about is where's my key, right? It's food, training, sleep, how do I get to the venue, warming up, bathroom, we can fix that problem. When you don't have to build those dorms, you can actually fix things like room keys. You can actually fix things like transportation. You can actually fix things like there's 5 50-meter pools on campus. Guess what? They don't have to leave campus to train for their events. There are Olympians at Drake probably today training for the Olympics. I mean, I go there and I see Allison Felix all the time. And so The Olympic Village at UCLA is truly incredible. I'm not sure any other city in the world can do that or has that when they talk about us as a model going forward, but we are going to use the hell out of it, and it's going to be an incredible advantage. So legacy. I am quick to remind people that you actually can't create a legacy until you create one. So that happens in 2029. But one of the things that was really important when we talked about waiting till 2028 was how do we at least have the impact of the Olympic Games start to touch people now? And one of the things we talked about and what we are starting to do and will enact fully this fall is going back to sort of the original principle of the Olympics, which is about social justice. And today, in this city and in this country, access to sport is dependent on the zip code you live in. And that's not right. And so what we are going to do, and what we took on as an expense at the organizing committee, with no defined revenue against it, is we are going to make access to sport for kids in the city of Los Angeles, anybody who is what you would describe as low or low middle income kid, completely subsidized. So that access to sport in this city is universal, because that's the opportunity to change a kid's life. And so starting September of this year, we will spend $160 million in the next 10 years to subsidize participation fees for kids for sports in the city of LA, delivered mostly through Rex and Park. And if we do our job right, which I think we will, if we do our job right, one of those kids is going to march in opening ceremonies in the summer of 2028. Because 10 years is just enough time to have a kid get that passion, to feel that spark, and to go after that opportunity. 5 years, Paris, you couldn't, right? You're too late. No, I mean you can't be good enough that fast. But 10 years you can, and that's a really, really exciting thing for us to think about. Obviously, we think there's going to be a huge impact on Southern California. Obviously, there's a lot of stuff going on in LA. But in the end, if we do nothing else, we will have probably doubled participation in youth sports programs, made it completely accessible to every corner of the city. And then if we do our job right in 2028, which I'm fairly confident we will, we're going to create a legacy, I think, far beyond what people imagine. And that's what gets me excited every morning. So with that, I want to say thank you for the opportunity to speak. Thank you for UCLA for building so many dorm rooms since 1984. Thank you for validating my diploma. And I would be happy to take questions for as long as we're allowed, although I heard Ms. Val speaking at 4:30, so people will want to run over to see her because she's a much bigger draw than I am. But if anybody has questions, I'd be happy to answer them. Yep. I think there's a mic right behind you, so there's...
Thank you so much. This is great. So a couple of UCLA-related things. So one is, I was just looking at, with the quarter system, that the spring quarter usually ends mid-June. So how does that work with the timing with people being off campus? The second question was, do you think you can get the UCLA marching band in there again? And then the last thought is just, it would be so cool in the dorms. You guys should put plaques up with what Olympians stayed there. So when the kids come in the future, they're like, whatever Olympian slept here kind of thing. That'd be cool.
First, it's really complicated. The USC and UCLA are on the semester and the quarter system because, they end way before we do, but they start in August, and we have to have the Paralympics. So we actually have to kind of adjust, if I'm being totally honest, both schedules a little bit. We got to get UCLA done a little sooner, and we got to get USC done a little later. It might not be an accident if we screw up the Coliseum a little longer to mess up USC football. I'm just saying. I don't know. In 2028, there will be adjustments to both schedules for sure. Both campuses will be affected operationally on some level. We will do our best, obviously, not to. We're not going to artificially do stuff, but everyone will have to make a little bit of adjustments. the plaque thing is a really good idea. We actually, I'll tell you a funny story. We had an office where we were housed for the bid, and every time we had an Olympian come in, we'd have him sign the wall. Just sign the wall. And then we're like, oh shit, like now we want to take the wall. Now what do we do? Because we moved into a permanent office, and we're like, wait, but anyway, and believe me, the amount of time we spent with architects trying to figure out how to actually take this wall off the wall. And then they actually figured out how to take a huge digital print, and then we printed it and we put it on things. So yes, because it's become sort of our little thing where everyone Olympian who comes to the office signs the wall, so that's a very good idea. And I don't have a ton of influence, but I'm pretty sure I can make sure the UCLA marching band is part of opening ceremonies. So.
Hi, great job putting together this and the presentation and what you've done thus far. Now, in the next 5 years, what do you see as your biggest 3 challenges in bringing the game and getting the kind of things that you've outlined for the city of Los Angeles?
It's a good question, because obviously we do have a long time, the longest, frankly, lead up to a Games in the history of the Olympics. So it's really unprecedented, and we're taking this sort of, yes, you can plan for 10 years, but you can't really plan anything for 10 years. So what we are doing is focusing in the first 3 years on really 3 things. One, making sure we have an organizational foundation in place that will allow us to grow. Because today we're 75 employees at I'm a volunteer, everyone else is an employee. So we have 75 employees at the enterprise. At our height, not including volunteers, will be about 6,000 in 2028. With volunteers, it'll be 50 to 100,000. And then, as Mitt Romney told me, it was the greatest professional experience of his life because everyone knew they were getting fired the same day. But if you think about it, we're a startup that is going to we will spend $6.5 billion and hopefully generate a lot more revenue than that. So we're a startup that's guaranteed to get big and then guaranteed to disappear. So it's a really odd thing. So the foundation's important. It's not that exciting. It's not that sexy, but it's important. The second thing is, most Olympic Games, their risk is around cost because they have to build everything. And our risk, if you will, is on revenue because we know our costs are pretty set. I mean, within the margins, it's almost highly predictable. And so if you think about our revenue, just rough number, $6.5 billion of cost. We get $2 billion from the IOC. We think we can generate $2.5 billion in sponsorships and a couple $2 billion in tickets. Rough numbers. There's more than that, but just rough numbers. So the $2 billion from the IOC is set. We've just struck a deal with NBC that essentially guarantees the $2.5 billion in sponsorship, and then the $2 billion in tickets. We won't sell a ticket till 12 months out. So we are doing everything we can to. I view my job purely on risk minimization. So I'm trying to create as high a floor as I can on revenue. I'll give up some upside to create certainty on the downside, and so we're really focused on revenue. So most of the hires we made, over half the employees at the enterprise are focused on generating revenue. The next thing we're doing is making sure we get this youth sports program right. I know it sounds crazy, but you can't just send a check for $16 million to the city of LA and make sure it works. Like, believe me, I wish that was the case, but it's a lot more complicated than that. So we have a team of people really focused on that. It's also the one place where we're actually responsible in some way. I mean, it's obviously we're not operating the programs, but it's our brand associated. We're responsible for the health and safety of kids. And so this has obviously never been more a priority and important. So we have to make sure we get that right. And then the last piece is, frankly, keep our head down. We will have plenty of time and plenty of opportunities to make a lot of noise, but we just want to be below the radar, do our jobs. In this environment, I think if you pick your head up, you can get it cut off pretty quickly. So create as little drama, make as few unforced errors as possible. And it's probably not 5 years, but that's really the next 3 years. That takes us kind of 3 years out of Paris. That next 3 years will actually be pretty quiet. And then the day Paris ends to the day we start, those 4 years will be a pretty normal cycle, except for one thing. So our what you would call Olympic overlay, where you start to see things that would affect campus, security perimeter go up around the dorm, security perimeter go up around USC. Some of that stuff won't go up until April of 2028. Because we don't have to build things, we have a lot more time to sort of maximize the opportunity to make those things efficient. And if we're trying to control costs, by the way, the longer we wait to do stuff, the cheaper it is. And so we're really looking at it as kind of a 3-3-4. We're a year into the first 3, and it's really focused on delivering that youth sports program, generating revenue, and making sure we have the pieces in place to be successful. Yeah, Leslie?
In addition to the legacy of the sports program, I'm just thinking about, this world today so divided and people not working together. And I'm wondering the thought you've given to sort of empowering all the different communities in the city to be able to give input and work together, and then we could use that as an ongoing model also.
So the one thing we as an organization have to be really careful about is, in the end, our job is to produce the Olympic Games for 17 days in the summer of 2028. And we cannot screw that up operationally or financially. And I think where a lot of Olympics go wrong is they somehow claim responsibility or get given responsibility for every problem that exists, right? I mean, I have people come up to me and say, what are you gonna do about homelessness? And I'm like, it's an awful problem. It is affecting the city. But we're producing the Olympic Games. I'm not sure how those two are connected. Or fix the traffic. I'm like, well, there are cities that have issues. But it goes back to my other point, which is, I think knowing that an opportunity like this exists in the future, communities can use it as how are we going to be better by 2028 without it having to be the responsibility of the organizing committee. And so we have to be really careful, because in the end, all those things sound great, and maybe they would be worthwhile distractions for us to get involved in. But if we wake up in 2028 and we've lost $100 million somehow, first of all, I have to move out of the city, so that would suck. And second of all, we will have broken our promise to the city. So we are trying to be really focused. We say no 99 times out of 100 to things, and we encourage everybody to use that line in the ground in 2028 to galvanize whatever it is that they're focused on and excited for. I mean, I wake up every day and I read a headline. I saw, Mayor Garcetti said 28 metro projects he wants to get done by 28. Then I wake up and Mayor Garcia in Long Beach is 8. He's got 8 by 28. And I read the mayor of West Hollywood. I somehow saw this headline, and he has 4 things for West Hollywood that he wants done by 12. So everyone, I think it's awesome, and I want them to use that the world is coming to LA and the spotlight of the world will be on LA. We just got to be really careful that we don't get into a place where we feel responsible for those things. Yeah.
Hi, I'm curious how you would differentiate. What does it mean to enlist and engage the Los Angeles community and really the national community in the Olympic movement versus engaging kids in sports? And obviously there's a lot of overlap there, but I wonder.
So a couple things. One, yes, these games are going to be in Los Angeles. But the games are coming to America, and don't be surprised if you see some events, whether it's preliminaries or actual competition events in other places besides Los Angeles. Number two, when you get the Olympics in your country, the organizing committee essentially takes over the marketing and sort of all revenue for your National Olympic Committee. So we now control all the marketing rights to Team USA, which is why you see the logos up there, Team USA, US Olympic Team, and the US Paralympic Team. And let me just say this about Team USA. First of all, I am a believer that if all we do is deliver a great games in 2028, we will have failed, because I do believe we have an opportunity to define what it means to be patriotic in this country at a time when it's probably never been needed more. Team USA is really the embodiment of everything that's right about this country. I would also tell you that Team USA is the single greatest female marketing platform in the world. There are more women on Team USA than men. They win more medals than the men, and they're the kind of people you would want your kids to be. And we don't celebrate that enough in this country. We're going to make sure that that torch goes to every state in this country and really touches those communities and celebrates the Olympians in all those communities. And so it's incumbent upon us, as it being responsible for the rights that we have as part of Team USA, to celebrate the American Olympic team. And that's going to start with Tokyo, because our athletes are going to go to Tokyo, our Paralympians are going to go to Tokyo, and they're going to kick ass. And our Paralympic team, let me just say this about the Paralympic team. 20% of U.S. Paralympians got their injuries in military service. 20%. You want to talk about being patriotic and everything that's right about human beings, it is of the U.S. Paralympic team. So we have to do a really, really good job of that, and we are spending a lot of time to really elevate the American athletes, the American Olympians, and celebrate them and their successes. And by the way, not just the Olympians, the ones who aspired to be Olympians and didn't get there. It's a really powerful platform that touches, frankly, every corner of this country. Yeah.
Can you touch upon athlete safety? You know, the recent Netflix documentary on the scandal with the U.S. women's Olympic or gymnastics. Any insight on that and or how you're thinking about it from a preparation and access point of view?
Yeah, so we sit in an interesting place as an organizing committee. You know, our responsibility for these athletes starts in the summer of 2028, literally. We don't operate, you know, I don't want to get into the weeds too much on the way so the U.S. Olympic Committee as an organization sits here. It exists by federal law. By federal law, it also has no oversight over the 40 nationally governing bodies. So take USA Swimming or USA Track and Field or USA Badminton, any of them. U.S. Tennis Association, by the way, USA Basketball, they're all the same. The USOC has no legal authority over them. Zero. They have their own boards. They have their own fundraising. They have their own processes. They have their own management. So it's a system that is designed. You can blame whoever you want, but that's what exists today. And I will just tell you, a bad CEO, which USA Gymnastics had, and an evil person, which the doctor was, and you have bad things happen. In any business and in any situation, anywhere in the world. What happened was absolutely horrific and inexcusable. But you had the two conditions you needed for something like that to happen. As an organizing committee, our job is to make sure that wherever we can push safe sport forward, to create an environment for understanding and teaching and handling of issues, we do. But just for some perspective, the U.S. Olympic Committee gets $0 from the federal government. Zero. We're the only developed nation on earth that provides $0 for its Olympians. Zero. The U.S. Olympic Committee 5 years ago went to Congress and asked for funding for the Safe Sport Institute, which did not exist 5 years ago. USOC went and said, we're going to put in $5 million. The federal government gave $0. So this is a complicated problem that requires a lot of work. I'm not running from the responsibility. It's a horrific issue. It's not what organizing committees do. It's obviously the responsibility of the U.S. Olympic Committee or the NGBs. But we as a country need to do more to invest in these, because the mistreatment of kids, I mean, look at this city we live in. It happens everywhere, every day. It's not just high-level gymnasts. I mean, what was Michigan State doing? They employed the doctor. And so we need to create structures and environments and protections and systems that understand and support and protect kids. If they're athletes, that's fine, but kids first, because the kids are the ones who are vulnerable. So for example, with our youth sports program in the city of LA, we are not operating those programs, right? The city of LA's programs are being operated. We're subsidizing the cost. We are demanding that they do not get $1 from us unless every person has gone through safe sport training. Non-negotiable. The sports leagues in this country need to do more. USA Sport Institute gets $0 from the NFL, $0 from the NBA, $0 from Major League Baseball, $0 from the National Hockey League. So it's easy to point at what happened at USA Gymnastics and blame them, but frankly, we are all responsible for doing more in this area, and we need to do more.
Hi. I read an October article. It said that the costs had gone above $7 billion, plus it didn't say whether it's 2028 or current dollars, and could there happen to be more cost increases that are not foreseen?
So the cost, you know, this is a good thing we're in the business school, because there's probably a professor here who could help us explain this. So when we bid, the IOC had us do the budget in 2016 dollars, even though it was delivered in 2017, and then in 2024 dollars. It was 5.4, 6.2. The 6.8 is those same numbers inflated at the same inflation rate of 1.9%. There is not a single cost that has changed. It is merely taking 2016 dollars and growing them at 1.9% to 2028. Just like I am certain that the budget of the University of California, Los Angeles will not be the same in total dollars in 2028 that it is today, because there's inflation, and there's football coaches who get paid more money. So our budget has not changed. We did not change a single venue. We did not change a single expense. We got some cost reductions from the IOC, and the only thing we added was $160 million for youth sports, which was an expense, and it was actually, we offset it because the IOC cut some other costs that, in terms of delivery, we did not change the plan is literally identical. The only thing that changed was 4 years of inflation at 1.9%. And we grew the revenues at the same exact rate.